one shot. That's all it took. Marbella, Spain, a place known for golf, sunshine, and retired millionaires pretending they're not hiding something. And in the middle of all that luxury, a Dublin man named Gerry Hutch, 34 years old, tanned, confident, and probably thinking the past was behind him. Spoiler, it wasn't. Because on a calm September morning in 2015, everything changed. Gerry had traded the grey skies of Dublin for the golden coast of Costa del Sol. It was supposed to be a fresh start, palm trees instead of police sirens. But Marbella wasn't just a resort town. It was a magnet for Irish money, and not always the clean kind. You had businessmen, ex-boxers, and guys who used to carry gym bags that jingled a little too much. Gerry was one of them. He wasn't a nobody. He was the nephew of Gerry, the monk Hutch, a name that could make half of Dublin's underworld tense up like they just swallowed broken glass. Now, the monk wasn't your average criminal. He was calm, methodical, almost zen, hence the nickname. But Gerry, he had that younger guy energy. Bold, a bit reckless, like to show he wasn't living in anyone's shadow. The thing is, Gerry also had friends, very rich, very powerful, and very dangerous friends. Guys like Daniel Kinahan, the son of Christy Kinahan, who ran what the media would later call Ireland's most powerful drug cartel. These were people who didn't do warnings, they did statements. And for a while, everything was fine. Marbella's son, fancy cars, Irish accents echoing around gated villas like a Costa del Dublin. But somewhere along the way, the friendship between the Kinahans and the Hutches cracked. Rumors started swirling. Gerry had supposedly crossed the wrong people. Maybe he took something that wasn't his. Maybe he said too much. Or maybe, and this is what really cooked the tension, someone thought Gerry was talking to the police. In that world, there's no bigger insult. You can mess with money, you can even mess with pride, but never with loyalty. By late 2015, Gerry's name was being whispered in Marbella bars. You know that look people give when they lower their voice but their eyes get wide. Yet that kind of whisper. And then came the morning of September 24th. The Miraflores estate looked like paradise, palm trees, swaying villas, gleaming tourists drinking cappuccinos by the pool. But behind one of those white walls, someone was waiting. A hitman, calm, professional. Gerry had no idea his walk that day would be his last. One witness later said it almost looked playful, two men near the pool like friends joking around. Then she saw the gun. Gerry raised his hands, begging, "No, no, no." 2 shots later, the sun kept shining, but everything else went dark. That single moment, that single trigger pull didn't just end a man's life. It ignited Ireland's deadliest gang war. Because when Gerry Hutch fell, old friendships turned into vendettas. And the message was clear. Betrayal doesn't retire in Marbella. Alright, grab a seat because this one's not your typical gangster bedtime story. This is about loyalty, paranoia, and one seriously expensive case of you picked the wrong people to mess with. So meet Gerry Hutch, Dublin lad, 34 years old. Grew up surrounded by names that carried weight. He was the nephew of Gerry, the monk Hutch, which in Dublin's underworld is like being born into the Corleone family. You don't get to choose that life, it kind of chooses you. Gerry wasn't some background character though. He'd been in trouble before robberies, gang work, the usual greatest hits. But over time, he started working abroad, linking up with the big boys, the Kinahan cartel in Spain. Now here's where it gets interesting. The Kinahans, run by Christy Kinahan and his son Daniel, had built this smooth international operation. We're talking millions flowing through fake companies, luxury villas doubling as meeting rooms, and Marbella turning into a kind of Irish criminal headquarters with better weather. And for a while, Gerry was in their circle. He wasn't just chilling by the pool, he was part of the crew. Trips, parties, money, that sweet Spanish sunshine. He was seen as trustworthy, part of the extended family. But the thing about that life, trust lasts exactly as long as the last favor you did for someone. Somewhere between 2014 and 2015, whispers started to spread. Someone inside was talking. Someone was double dealing. Now, in normal life, you just unfollow them on Instagram. In that world, people start making phone calls, quiet ones, and guess whose name kept coming up? Gerry's. There were rumors that he'd set up a failed hit against one of the Kinahans, that he'd pocketed money, that he was feeding info to the Spanish cops. None of it confirmed, but here's the problem. When everyone around you owns a gun, rumor can get you killed. Gerry Hutch, the monk himself, apparently tried to calm things down. He wasn't stupid. He knew what a feud with the Kinahans could mean decades of chaos. So a deal was discussed, some say a six-figure payout, Gerry stepping back, maybe even a kind of truce. But you know how these things go once trust's broken? It's like trying to put toothpaste back in the tube. No one really believes anyone. So Gerry stayed in Marbella, tried to keep his head down. But even paradise has shadows. He was still being watched, still being talked about. And by September 2015, the whispers had turned into plans. Not rumors anymore, orders. What nobody knew that week was that Gerry Hutch had less than a few days left to live. The hit wasn't just coming, it was already booked, paid for, and waiting. So it's the morning of September 24th, 2015. Marbella's sun is already up, that golden, smug kind of sunshine that makes you forget bad things exist. Tourists are sipping espresso, retirees are bragging about their golf swings, and somewhere in that peaceful scene, Gerry Hutch is heading out for a run. He's living in the Miraflores estate, a quiet, gated community near Feud. Palms, white walls, pools, the kind of place where you expect to hear lawnmowers, not gunshots. But while Gary's stretching his legs, someone else is stretching a plan. A man in a balaclava, calm as a cat in the sun, waiting in the shadows with a pistol. He's not nervous. This isn't personal, it's business. And Gerry, he's about to become a message. Now, according to witnesses, it happened fast. A woman in one of the nearby apartments later told police she saw two men near the pool, one chasing the other. At first, she thought they were fooling around like friends splashing water at each other. Then she saw the gun. Gerry realized what was happening too late. He tried to run. He tried to plead. No, no, no. But the shooter didn't flinch. 2 shots, then silence. It was surgical, cold, professional. Gerry collapsed on the ground, and the killer walked away like it was just another Thursday. A black car was waiting, burned out later in a nearby street, standard cartel cleanup. Police arrived, but by then the killer was gone, probably already halfway across the coast with a fake passport and a cold beer. Now imagine the irony. Gerry had moved to Spain to avoid the chaos of Dublin's gangland life. But it followed him quietly, patiently, and with perfect aim. The guards later confirmed that this wasn't a random hit. Gerry's murder was premeditated, a professional assassination. It had all the fingerprints of a cartel job, money, precision, and 0 witnesses willing to talk. And in that single morning, something irreversible happened. That Villa Terrace in Marbella became the domino that knocked over an entire empire. Because once Gerry was gone, it wasn't just a death, it was an insult. To his uncle Gerry, the monk Hutch, it was personal. To the Kinahans, it was a warning to anyone else who might think of turning. And to Ireland, it was the quiet before a storm that would soon rip through Dublin like never before. Nobody could have guessed it that day, but this was just the first shot in what would become Ireland's bloodiest criminal feud. When word got back to Dublin that Gerry Hutch was gone, you could almost feel the temperature drop. Not the weather, the air, the street kind, the kind that lets you know something's about to go wrong. Because this wasn't just another gangland hit, this was family. And if you know anything about the Hutchs, you know that loyalty isn't a hobby, it's practically a religion. So yeah, Gerry's murder hit hard. The guards could already tell what was coming, but even they didn't realize how deep this was about to go. The Hutch family saw the killing as an open declaration a line had been crossed. And the thing about crossing the Hutchs, they don't write angry tweets, they retaliate. Behind the scenes, old alliances were breaking. People who used to toast champagne together in Marbella were suddenly checking under their cars before starting them. It was like everyone realized at the same time, alright, this is war now. And that's exactly what it became. The first few months after Gerry's death were quiet, too quiet. Everyone was pretending to play it cool, but Dublin was simmering. The Kinahans were tightening security, the Hutch side gathering, watching, waiting. Then February 2016 hit and the waiting was over. If Gerry's murder was the spark, the Regency Hotel shooting was the explosion. Picture this, a crowded boxing weigh-in at the Regency Hotel in North Dublin. Reporters, fans, fighters all there for an event linked to Daniel Kinahan's boxing circle. Then suddenly armed men storm in dressed like guards. One of them's even carrying what looks like a news camera. People think it's a raid. It wasn't. Gunfire breaks out. Panic everywhere. By the time the smoke clears, David Byrne, a close ally of the Kinahans, is dead. That's when everyone realized the Hutch had just hit back. Not quietly, not carefully, publicly, in daylight, with masks, fake uniforms, and zero fear of headlines. Boom, the feud was official. Over the next few years, Dublin became a chessboard with live pieces. More than a dozen people killed. Some gunned down in their driveways, others while sitting in cars. A few had nothing to do with either side, wrong place, wrong time, still gone. Every time it looked like things might cool down, another bullet showed up in the story. And yet, in the middle of all that, both sides kept denying involvement. Statements, lawyers, media spin the usual dance. But everyone on the streets knew the truth. Gerry's death had kicked open a door that would never fully close again. Even the guards admitted later it was one of the most violent criminal feuds in Irish history. Over 50 shootings, 17 confirmed murders, all from one man's death in Spain. The most haunting part. For Gerry Hutch, it didn't end when he fell by that pool. It only started there. Here's the part that'll make you shake your head. Before the bullets, before Marbella turned into a crime scene, there was actually a deal on the table. Yeah, a peace deal. Apparently, some of the old school guys on both sides were trying to calm things down. Nobody wanted to see a war. Not the Kinahans, not the Hutchs, not the people who had to live in the middle of it. So there were talks, private ones, whispered through contacts and middlemen. The idea was simple. Gerry Hutch pays compensation, everyone walks away, and the feud never happens. Basically, hush money for peace. The number floating around? Somewhere in the six-figure zone. Enough to buy silence. Maybe even forgiveness. And here's the wild part, it almost worked. Gerry's uncle Gerry, the monk Hutch, was apparently doing everything he could to avoid bloodshed. He understood what a war like this would do not just to the gangs, but to the city, to families, to people who had nothing to do with it. So a meeting was arranged, calls were made, promises were exchanged. But the problem with peace in that world, it's fragile. All it takes is one whisper, one paranoid thought, one he's lying moment, and it's gone. Some say the Kinahans didn't trust that Gerry would keep his distance. Others claim someone inside the circle kept feeding both sides bad information, stirring the pot. Whatever it was, the deal collapsed before the ink was dry. And once that trust evaporated, there was no going back. You could almost feel the shift. Marbella wasn't sunny anymore. Gerry's name went from former ally to liability. And in that life, a liability doesn't get a second chance. So yeah, there was a chance to stop it. There was a window to keep the feud from ever starting. But it slammed shut the second greed and ego walked in. And that's what makes it so tragic. This wasn't fate. It was human pride. One handshake away from saving lives until someone decided that silence wasn't enough. That deal could have changed everything. Instead, it became the ghost that haunted everything after. You'd think that after a conviction, people might stop and say, "All right, lads, that's enough." Yeah, no. By the time James Quinn got his 22-year sentence in Spain, Dublin was already knee-deep in revenge. Every corner of the city seemed to know someone who knew someone who'd picked a side. It wasn't just the Hutchs and Kinahans anymore, it was cousins, cousins of cousins, and guys who barely even knew Gerry but decided to get involved because, well, that's what happens when egos get bigger than common sense. The Hutchs wanted payback. The Kinahans wanted dominance. And caught in the middle. Ordinary people just trying to get to work without walking into a feud that didn't belong to them. One of the worst parts, the mistakes. People with similar cars or last names getting ambushed. Shooters targeting the wrong man because someone passed the wrong photo. Imagine being a completely innocent bloke and realizing the headline the next morning was supposed to be about somebody else. The guards did everything they could, raids, arrests, surveillance, but it was like trying to hold back a wave with a mop. Every arrest just seemed to provoke another attack, and each side wanted the last word. It stopped feeling like organized crime and started feeling like chaos with expensive cars. The Hutch side, once known for keeping things quiet, was being hunted. The Kinahans, flush with international money, were expanding faster than the guards could keep up. And the city Dublin, usually full of laughter and noise, felt tense. You could walk down certain streets and feel the silence. Years later, when things finally began to cool, people tried to count the cost. More than a dozen lives lost, families displaced, a reputation burned across two countries, Ireland and Spain. And here's the cruel twist. The war didn't really have a winner, just survivors. Gerry Hutch's death was supposed to send a message. Instead, it started an echo that still hasn't completely faded. Even today, whispers of the feud linger in pubs, headlines, and police briefings. Everyone remembers where it began, Marbella, by that pool in the sunshine. And that's the haunting part. Because for all the money, power, and bravado, it only took one man's death to prove something simple and brutal. That in Ireland's underworld, the past doesn't die. It reloads. So after all that, the shootings, the headlines, the years of chaos, what did it really prove? Not much. Nobody walked away richer. Nobody walked away respected. Just a trail of funerals and silence. The Kinahans kept building their empire abroad, turning boxing into a front-page controversy, hiding behind legitimate faces and global brands. The Hutch side, torn apart. Family members scattered, some locked up, others trying to live like normal people while the shadow never really left them. And through it all, one truth kept echoing. It all started with Gerry Hutch, a guy who once sat beside the same men who later wanted him gone. He wasn't a saint, not even close, but he became a symbol of how quickly loyalty turns into target practice when money and pride mix. Ireland changed after that. People started realizing that organized crime wasn't some movie subplot. It was real, it was messy, and it was happening in plain sight. Guards had to rethink how to handle transnational crime because this wasn't local beef anymore. It stretched from Dublin to Malaga, from courtrooms to boxing rings, from Marbella villas to north side streets. And the twist? The feud didn't destroy one side, it quietly destroyed both. One through prison sentences, the other through paranoia. Everyone lost something: friends, trust, family, peace. Gerry's name, once whispered with fear, turned into a warning, the before picture of what happens when greed outpaces sense. Because in the end, one single morning in Marbella did more than end a man's life. It ended an era. The Irish underworld would never be the same again. The Kinahan-Hutch feud left scars deeper than bullets, scars you can't see, but you can still feel. And that's the irony, all that power, all that money, all those years. And it all began because one man tried to survive in a world where nobody really does. And that's the story, the morning in Marbella that turned Ireland's underworld inside out. One name, one gun, and one really bad decision that dragged two families and half a country into years of madness. It's wild, isn't it? All those luxury villas, power plays, and big promises, and in the end, nobody actually wins. Because when loyalty is built on fear and friendships built on profit, it only takes one whisper to make the whole thing collapse. Gerry Hutch didn't plan to start a war. but he did. And the echo of that single moment still follows everyone who was there, from Dublin's alleyways to Spain's coast. If you like this story and you want more real Irish cases that sound too insane to be fiction, you know what to do. Drop a like, hit subscribe, and stick around. Because this world, it's full of stories like this one. And trust me, the next one's even darker.